to day 2 of our series of webinars. Good to see you back. As a police officer, I strived in all my career to put the victims of crime at the heart of all I did. I saw at first hand how children were often the innocent victims, their young lives thrown off track, not just by the devastation of serious crime, but also by the crime that occurs more often than most of us would like to believe, violence in the home. Today, we are considering the social impact of increasing cases of sexual violence and domestic violence, crimes that sadly are often linked. But first, a reminder of the housekeeping points that will improve your webinar experience. At the bottom of your screen are multiple application engagement tools you can use. All the tools are resizable and movable, so please feel free to move them around. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner. If you have any questions for our speakers during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A engagement tool. We will try to answer these in a panel session at the end of the presentations with Embrace Chief Executive Anne Campbell. But if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered latterly via email. Please know we do capture all questions and your feedback is really important to us. A copy of today's slide deck and additional help materials are available in the resource list. We encourage you to download any resources or links that you may find useful. For the best viewing experience, we recommend using a wired internet connection and closing any programs or browser sessions running in the background that could cause issues. Webinars are bandwidth intensive, so closing any unnecessary browser tabs will help conserve your bandwidth. The webinar is being streamed through your computer, so there is no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your computer speakers or your headset are turned on and the volume is up so you can hear the presenters. Some networks cause slides to advance more slowly than others, so logging off your VPN is recommended. If your slides are behind, pushing F5 on your keyboard will refresh the page. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues located in the Help Engagement tool at the bottom of your screen. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately 1 day after the webcast and can be accessed using the same audience link that you used to access this session. Now back to today. Many of our audience will not be surprised to learn that domestic abuse and sexual violence account for the highest number of referrals received by Embrace by far. They account for over 2/3 of all referrals. Our speakers consider these crimes from 3 different perspectives: from policing, from a personal injury lawyer, and from a survivor whose inspiring story is not for the faint-hearted. Chief Constable Joe Shiner of Sussex is the National Policing Lead for Children and Young People. Jo just doesn't talk about what's being done to support the next generation. She puts her training shoes on regularly to run marathon events for the charity. She must be one of the fittest chief officers in the country. Jo is followed by Rhys Dickinson, who, in the space of 3 months at the end of last year, graduated with a master's degree in international law, successfully reached Everest Base Camp in an Embrace charity challenge, and began his career with a new job in the city. Rhys is personally responsible for a surge in victims of sexual violence contacting Embrace for support. Finally today, we are joined by Kim Harrison, Head of Abuse Operations at Slater and Gordon Lawyers, our series sponsor. Don't forget, you can ask questions by emailing them during the presentations.
Good morning. My name is Jo Shiner and I'm the Chief Constable of Sussex Police. I'm also the National Police Lead for Children and Young People, which includes anybody up to 24 years old. I'm a very proud trustee for Embrace and a reluctant marathon runner in order to raise vital funds for them. My interest and passion for children and young people comes from the years that I spent as a detective sergeant on the Child Protection Unit in Norfolk. I saw firsthand the devastating impact that domestic and sexual abuse, alongside neglect and other forms of cruelty, could have on children and young people. What I also saw during what were probably the most impactful years of my career was how vulnerable some of those children and young people were whilst the crimes were being committed against them or in their family environment. What was striking was how much more vulnerable they continued to be, probably for the rest of their lives. For those young victims or witnesses of crime and those more widely exposed to criminal environments, there has to be a joined-up approach from the public sector. The real added value to their futures, however, comes from the support of charities such as Embrace and others. I have not seen one case where a single agency was in a position to protect, safeguard and support young victims alone. I want to share with you, just to illustrate that point, a snapshot of those children who came to police attention in just one county yesterday. 152 individual children came to police attention for a combination of missing person incidents, police intelligence reports and crime occurrences. The average age of those children was 11 years. 3 of them were under 2. 98 of those 152 children had previously been referred to children's social care on at least one occasion. 51 of those 152 children were involved in incidents that related to domestic abuse. One of the most vulnerable of those children from yesterday, a 17-year-old girl, has in the previous 12 months been arrested 12 times, been reported missing 24 times, and been the subject of 157 separate police intelligence reports. That is despite some intense interagency working to support that young lady. It's been heartening to see the progress which has been made to ensure that we all work together on a multi-agency basis to safeguard and to protect. Those areas where this is particularly important is where the child or young person has been exposed to domestic abuse, sexual violence or other serious violence or controlling behaviours, often at the hands of gang culture. Quite often, by the time they come to police notice, or indeed the notice of any other agency, that child or young person will already have seen, heard and experienced things which will probably change their lives forever. Therefore, our role has to be to work together and assess the needs of that child and young person, to truly understand how we can safeguard them and provide the best possible opportunity for them to overcome what they've experienced and have a successful future. It therefore follows that when partners determine their priorities, children and young people must be at the very forefront of those. For example, domestic abuse, sexual abuse, child exploitation, online crime such as grooming, and serious violence, particularly that which involves county lines, are the crimes that policing in the UK currently prioritise. That is the right thing to do. I am confident that the partnership approach has evolved over the years, and the systems and processes in place now greatly assist our ability to work in a joined-up way to protect children. We all know of those high-profile cases where in the past this has not been so. We must never become complacent about the systems and the processes that we have today, and we must always be striving to improve those for the children of tomorrow. In fact, this will become ever more important for those children and young people who will undoubtedly have been impacted in some way by the unprecedented events of this year. The manner in which COVID-19 has completely changed the landscape for many is largely unquantifiable at this moment in time. We know that there has been an increase in online crime, and we know that many of those children and young people for whom school and their friends were a sanctuary and a place where they felt safe will actually have been constrained in a home environment with their often dysfunctional families, suffering or witnessing domestic, sexual and violent abuse. We know that for some, those weeks spent in lockdown will be an indelible memory for all of the wrong reasons. It has therefore never been more important that charities such as Embrace develop and thrive in order that these young people can receive the help and support that they need to try and overcome those internal and external barriers which may prevent them from having that successful future. As the National League for Children and Young People, it's very important to me that policing has a child-centred approach and that children are always treated as children first in every situation, and that we properly understand the vulnerability in order to protect them from harm. Every interaction that policing has with a child and young person is an opportunity for intervention, whether an intervention to prevent them from becoming a victim of crime or an intervention to prevent them from becoming an offender. Our engagement, whatever the circumstances, must be as positive and empathetic as possible, so that we properly listen to and hear the voices. What we do know is that when we do listen properly to the child's voice and work in true partnership, we can bring successful prosecutions which not only safeguard those children who are the victims, but also protect any future children who may have suffered at the hands of that perpetrator. Indeed, I am soon to meet with a brave young victim in Sussex who, when we invested the time and appropriate care into, was able to be such an effective witness that the perpetrator of the horrific crimes against her has now received a significant sentence. Working with our colleagues in the Crown Prosecution Service, that is just one example of many where we know that justice has been served. With COVID-19 being such a factor in the future of today's youth, any opportunity we have to use early intervention and divert young people away from crime or antisocial behaviour must be taken, and there are some excellent examples of schemes where we know and have demonstrable evidence that that is working. I know that you will be hearing from Police and Crime Commissioner Katie Bourne about a very successful scheme that we have in Sussex, which is called Reboot. What is also key, in light of our increased awareness around Black Lives Matter, is that all of us, whether a statutory agency, voluntary agency, or a critical friend to the safeguarding care of children and young people, is that we also identify, understand and address disproportionality where it relates to diversity. The progress that has been made to develop the correct protocols in order that children and young people can give their evidence in the most age-appropriate way has seen a step change in justice being done. For example, the Under 10 Youth Witness Protocol, where the emphasis is on cases going to the CPS and therefore court as soon as possible in order to minimise the pressure and the stress on those young witnesses at what is already a difficult time in their lives. As professionals, we must remember that whilst justice is incredibly important, it sometimes won't help that young person to get on with their lives, such as the impact of the crimes against them. Therefore, roles such as child ISVAs, independent sexual violence advisors, are as important in order for that young person to have the professional help to move forwards. As many new officers and police staff investigators enter policing, I want, through my portfolio, to encourage them to always think child, which in reality means developing and growing their professional curiosity in relation to the risk to a child or young person in any situation that they attend. We want them to feel confident to communicate at the right level and not be afraid to dig deeper and ask further questions. It is imperative for both policing and our partners, who will often pick up or share in the decision making around these cases, that we accurately record what is seen and heard, and that we maintain the trust of the child or young person by responding to the incident as we have promised them we will do. Anybody who works in this area can and will find themselves as the voice of the child. and it is vital that that voice is heard. Safeguarding is a role for everybody, including all of our communities, and every one of us must understand the impact on a child when an incident occurs. And finally, I just want to say a personal thank you to all of those people on the front line of safeguarding our future generation, whether police, social workers, health workers, teachers, or indeed in this case, our charitable sector workers. Without the professionalism and day-on-day dedication that you all show to young people who sometimes don't even know themselves that they are vulnerable, the future for them would be much worse. We must never underestimate the honest and bravery of many of those young people who do come forwards. Thank you very much.
Through this time of change.
Hi, my name is Rhys Dickinson. I'm a trustee and young ambassador of Embrace, and also I was a child victim of sexual and physical abuse when I was younger, and I'm here today to give you kind of all an insight into my experiences, kind of what happened to me and how that made me feel, how it affected me and how it affected my family, and how I got through that with the support of Embrace and other organisations that kind of helped me to change my life. So I think the kind of best place to start to give you a real insight is kind of go back all the way to the beginning of when I was first abused, probably even like before then, so kind of what my life was like before that. So growing up, I'd experienced, my dad had was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and my life was kind of very like up and down, and he was very like in and out of my life, and I had like a great supporting mum and grandparents, and everything was well. And then my mum met this new man who came into our lives, and kind of I thought at first it was all really nice and really good, and kind of thought he might be that sort of father figure that I was kind of missing in my life after all the stuff I'd experienced with my dad and his mental illness. And I thought it was going to bring some stability to my life. And like I say, the first couple of years were really, really good. And then all of a sudden things started to change. And I think it was around the age of about 6 that the first time it started off with physical abuse. He would kind of hit me and kind of torment me and kind of had this control and kind of power over me, and I was really scared of him, and yeah, I just didn't know kind of what to do. And once he had this power, once he had this control, and he knew that I was scared of him, kind of moved on to sexual abuse. And I remember one of the first times I was just sitting downstairs and my mum was out, and he came in and said to me, "Oh, I've got a job for you to do." And then took me upstairs, and I was kind of just like, what's this job I've got to do? Like, I thought it was some sort of like household chore or something like that. And then he started touching me and making me touch him and do stuff to him, and he would like do stuff to me. And I just remember the first time just kind of being frozen, just scared, crying. I didn't know kind of what was happening. I was so young and so scared of him. I didn't really know what was kind of going on, and it started kind of quite like low level, just him touching me, and like he'd make me touch him and do stuff to him, like give him oral sex and stuff. And then it gradually progressed over the next weeks and months to him actually raping me. I think I just remember the first time kind of that happened to me. I just didn't know what to do. I was kind of frozen. I remember crying and screaming, and he like pushed my head down into like a pillow, so no one could like hear me. And it was just such a kind of unreal experience. It was just so horrible, and I just felt so kind of dirty and ashamed afterwards. I remember going afterwards and just sitting in the shower and just crying, and kind of that happened multiple times. And he told me I couldn't tell anyone, and I was so scared of him anyway, and I was just so confused. I kind of didn't know what to do, and it got to the point where this was going on for a number of years, and I kind of got to the point where I was like, is my life really even worth living anymore? Is it even worth being alive? And I kind of contemplated taking my own life a few times. I thought it'd be an easier way out, because I just couldn't live with what was going on. I couldn't see any end to what was going on. There was no light at the end of the tunnel. It made me really kind of aggressive at school. I was kind of lashing out at people, because I just had so much anger built up inside me. It was affecting my life at home, because I didn't want to be in the house. When you're a child, like, going home should be the safe place, but every time I thought about going home, I thought, this is where something bad's going to happen to me. Every time, every day, every hour, I was like, when's it going to happen? Is it going to be today, or am I safe today? And it's just that constantly going around in my head, going to bed, knowing that when I wake up in the morning, is something going to happen to me, or is he going to come in? Like, a couple of times he came in like the middle of the night, and I just never felt safe at kind of any point. So I try and kind of be out the house as much as possible, and just trying to avoid him. And every time I just thought, what can I do? Like, if I tell anyone, are they going to believe me? And I felt ashamed, and I felt dirty, and I just didn't know kind of what to do. And I was so young, I didn't really know where I could go. And like I say, I think it's something that a lot of people kind of experience, is kind of not knowing where they can go, and kind of being scared of the abuse and being ashamed. I think that was my biggest point. I felt ashamed, like, are people going to judge me for what's happened to me? But like I said, every day I kind of managed to find a little bit of hope, something to kind of cling on to, a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, something that kind of made me happy, or made my day, something to look forward to. I knew that in the end, hopefully I could eventually get out of there, even though at times it felt like I couldn't. I was like, no, one day, just keep going, Rhys, just keep going. And in the end, I managed to build up the courage to tell my mum what had happened to me. And we went to the police to report that. And it was such a weight off of my shoulders. It affected me so much, but to finally be able to tell someone and kind of have them believe you, know that they knew that you were telling truth and they were going to help you and they were going to support you through this, meant the absolute kind of world to me. And it was literally a weight lifted off my shoulders. And it was one of the best things that I ever did. And going from that into kind of the trial, and I think just before the trial, we'd spent a few weeks in police protection because they'd had information that he'd taken a contract out on my mum's life to stop us testifying. So that was another kind of experience where we were just one night uplifted from our homes, just kind of moved around. And it felt like you're in a movie. It was such a unreal and surreal experience to kind of go through, just been through what I've already been through, and then to go through that before the trial. And I hadn't really received much help prior to the trial, so I was trying to deal with all of this stuff. And I had people at school asking me questions because it was in the local newspaper, and they'd just kind of seen that, and he was named, and like some of my friends kind of knew who he was. So I kind of withdrew myself and kind of isolated myself. I was scared to kind of go out the house, and I was dealing with a lot of anxiety and depression and kind of flashbacks. I kind of had nightmares about what had happened, and then I started suffering with migraines because it's just the stress kind of just took over, and I just couldn't stop thinking. I couldn't get everything off of my mind. And then that's when I decided that I needed some help. And Embrace were there to support me, first of all, with their trip to Disney World, Florida, which was the first time I kind of felt like I wasn't alone. Going to Disney World with about 8 other families who had been through similar experiences was the first time I felt like, okay, I'm not the only one in the world that's going through this. There was other people that had gone through what I had been through, and that kind of started to change my life. It was a turning point. And then after that, going to counselling and being able to talk to someone about what had happened to me, and kind of explore my feelings. I couldn't understand what I was feeling, and I was still ashamed, and still felt dirty, and I felt kind of upset about what had happened to me. And I still had a lot of anger. I was still lashing out and getting into fights at school because I just had so much anger built up against my abuser that I was taking it out on other people. And just talking to my counsellor, I learned how to deal with that trauma and kind of understand my feelings and kind of control it more. And it took a while. It wasn't easy going to counselling. I think sometimes there's a bit of a stigma against counselling, and people are like, oh, I don't need help, I don't need support. But I know I wouldn't be where I am in my life without that support, without going to talk to someone. I don't know whether I'd be here today or be in the same position that I am today and be as happy as I am today. So it was definitely one of the biggest kind of changing points in my life, taking that step and going to talk to someone, because it truly changed my life. And then I went off to university to kind of get away from where I was living, a new start, fresh start. And then again, that changed my life. And I got to the point where I felt confident that I could now talk to other people about what had happened to me. It took a while. It wasn't until I started my master's that I really kind of told people at university about what had happened to me back home, about the abuse and what I'd been through. I told my athletics team, and they were really supportive, and I wanted to give something back. So we decided to do some fundraising for Embrace, and that's how I kind of really got involved in the charity, how I'm involved today, just through that initial fundraising. Kind of got in touch with them, telling them about how they'd been supported me when I was younger and kind of changed my life. And I wanted to help other people. I thought we'd just do some fundraising and raise some money. And it turned out I kind of got a bit more involved, started doing some stuff and telling my story in the media, and it kind of grew from there. And I just saw the impact that I could have on other people's lives, because I know what I'd been through, I know what I'd suffered, and kind of I still to this day, it's not easy. I still struggle with certain things, and it's never easy to talk about it. But I know if I can stand up tall and kind of speak out and share my experiences, it helps other people. The messages that I've had from kind of speaking out and talking about the support that I've got, what I went through and how I felt, other people can relate to that. And they've messaged me saying how good it is and how supported they felt, and it's given them the confidence to kind of seek the help that they need, because it's never easy admitting kind of what had happened to you, even though it's not your fault. I kind of felt like it was my fault. I felt like I must have done something wrong, and I think there's definitely some common conceptions that you have when you're in that position, kind of feeling like it's your own fault, that no one's gonna believe you. And I was like, if I can empower people with my experience to kind of believe that people are going to be there to support them, and you can kind of change your life. I never imagined I'd be in the position where I am today, even 10 years ago, going back, kind of looking at that point where I was contemplating whether my life was even worth it, to now gone on to university, studied a law degree, got a master's in international law. Now I'm working in the city with a really good job, and being trustee of Embrace and doing some amazing things with the charity to kind of support other children. I think it shows that what you really can achieve. I think I always say, there's a good quote that, so life's 10% about what happens to you, but 90% about how you react to it and what you do about it. I didn't want to let the abuse get me down. I didn't want to be a victim. I wanted to thrive. I wanted to use my experiences to kind of make me a stronger, better person. I wish I could turn back the clock and what happened to me didn't happen, but that's not possible. So what I can do is use the experiences that I've been through to make me stronger, make me a better person, but also to help support other people. And I think without that talking therapy, without the counselling, I wouldn't be in a position. Without Embrace, I wouldn't be here where I am today. And I feel honoured and privileged to be a trustee of the charity and be able to give back. And recently we did the Mount Everest trek for our Amazon Prime documentary, and that was such a unreal experience with another survivor of childhood abuse and serving police officers and charity fundraisers. It was such a great experience, and it kind of really sent out a positive message that you can kind of overcome anything if you put your mind to it. You can achieve whatever you want. You can overcome the highest mountains, and I think that documentary sends a really positive message about what you can achieve. And when you've been through something like this, and when you've experienced something, it can take two paths. It can ruin your life, or you can use it to make your life better. And I've used it to make my life better. I didn't want to let it get me down. And I can only thank Embrace for that, for supporting me and my friends and my family to get me to where I am. There's definitely more that we can all do to support children and families harmed by crime. And I hope, like, my story, telling you a little bit about this and how I kind of got there and what I've achieved, shows the impact that charities like Embrace can have on children's lives and how it can change children's lives for the better. There's a lot of work that we all need to do to carry on that work. It's a long challenge, and there's so many children out there that have been affected by crime, whether that be abuse, physical or sexual, knife crime, gang-related crime, cyber crime, whatever it is. We need to be there to support them. And there's so many services out there that are doing such a great job. We just we need to make sure we support them better with fundraising, grants, etc. So that's kind of a bit about my story and kind of how I got to where I am and kind of how it impacted me. So hopefully that's given you a good insight into someone that was affected by physical and sexual abuse and has kind of turned their life around for the better. And thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Kim Harrison and I'm a principal lawyer in the abuse team at Slater and Gordon. I only have a short amount of time to speak today, and so simply want to introduce you to the work we do in the abuse team, helping victims and survivors of abuse and assault. We primarily deal with child sexual abuse cases, both recent and non-recent, but also act for adults who've been assaulted as well. We are civil lawyers, bringing claims against organisations and institutions where abuse has taken place, such as the Catholic and Anglican Church, other religious organisations, the Scouts, schools, hospitals, care homes, local authorities and sports clubs, amongst many others. Very occasionally, if the perpetrator has sufficient wealth, we would look at claims against individuals, but that is very rare indeed. Although we have brought claims against individuals in the past for victims and survivors, including the taxi cab rapist John Warboys and against the late Max Clifford. We also bring civil claims for victims and survivors of child sexual exploitation and grooming gangs. As well as bringing civil compensation claims against organisations and institutions, we also act for individuals in bringing criminal injuries compensation scheme claims, so the government-based tariff scheme to compensate victims of crime. My colleague Claire John Bocas will talk more about that next week in her session with you. Finally, since 2016, we've been heavily involved in representing clients at a public inquiry, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, or ICSA for short. This is a statutory inquiry looking at institutional responses to child sexual abuse over the decades. We've represented clients in a large number of investigations at ICSA, and we've helped them to tell the inquiry their experiences of institutional response to abuse, including abuse in Lambeth children's homes, minority religious organisations, Westminster, schools, and many others. It is important to reflect sometimes on how far as a society we have come in respect of children's rights over the past 20 or 30 years, as well as recognising the very real challenges ahead and how far we still have to go. I want to spend some time looking at some key positive changes we have seen and then look at what more there is to do. So firstly, the changing attitude of the police to child sexual exploitation and child sexual abuse. So through my work at the Independent Inquiry, I've seen victims and survivors of non-recent childhood sexual abuse give testimony after testimony of not being believed by the police when they tried to tell their story, of social services and other organisations ignoring or disbelieving them if they were trying to disclose abuse at the time it occurred. I've also seen how value judgments were made at that time by statutory authorities based on whether or not they fitted the stereotype of the perfect victim. Evidence has been given of how police doorstep potential victims in front of parents or their own children and partners without warning, how police interviewed them in a very insensitive or inexperienced way. It is clear that there has been huge progress over the decades. Now police tend to have specialist child sexual exploitation or child sexual abuse units to deal with such crimes. There's an awful lot of training and educational work and more joined up work with police and other statutory services. It's clear that ABE interview techniques have vastly improved victims' and survivors' experience of reporting. I rarely now hear any negative comments from clients about their experience of reporting to the police or giving a police interview, and that's something very much to be celebrated. Secondly, the changing attitude of courts, special measures and anonymity, which is now embedded into our criminal justice system. So the improvement in police interviewing and expertise has also been complemented by the special measures that the criminal courts now have in place to ensure, so far as practical, that complainants giving evidence at court can do so in such a way as to minimise the trauma and fear and to allow them to give their best evidence. So, for example, there's the use now of curtains or screens, or giving evidence by video link, or the use of intermediaries to assist vulnerable witnesses, and most importantly, by ensuring their anonymity is maintained throughout the proceedings and also after they conclude. All of these steps forward have made a massive difference to victims and survivors. Thirdly, the societal and cultural attitude to child victims, particularly child sexual exploitation victims. This is perhaps most graphically illustrated in the BBC Three Girls documentary, which was aired a few years back on our television screens. My colleague Richard Scorer represented Girl A, whose story was told in the documentary, which stayed extremely true to life. We have seen changing terminology, so we no longer use the words child prostitution, and issues around grooming and grooming gangs and consent are much more understood by the wider population, and that can only be a good thing. Child sexual exploitation used to be seen as the fault of the victims and a lifestyle choice, and criminal injury scheme compensation applications were routinely rejected on the basis that victims consented in fact to their abuse, even if they did not consent in law. Part of the problem is the definition of the crime of violence within the scheme itself, and we say that further reform is needed on that front to reflect the fact that most sexual offences don't involve a man that you've never met jumping out of the bushes, but instead involve someone the victim knows and trusts, often from within their own family or friendship circle, and someone who often grooms and manipulates them into silence. So looking at the positives, let's look at what needs to change. Firstly, mental health support for victims and survivors of abuse, both during the criminal trial process and after the criminal trial process, still isn't good enough and does need to change. We've seen during COVID-19 services cut back to the bone as people are unable to access face-to-face support, and many are not being able to access the support that they need virtually. Secondly, the impact of austerity and COVID-19 has meant that there can be huge obstacles now faced by both alleged victims and the statutory authorities to support those victims. We know that more and more victims are reporting their abuse to the police, but the resources to deal with those reports simply aren't there in the way that they should be, and this is putting a huge strain on statutory services. It is also clear that there are serious concerns, particularly amongst charities and organisations that advocate for women and children, that the Crown Prosecution Service are simply not choosing to charge and bring cases. So figures from August this year show that rape prosecutions have fallen to their lowest level since records began, a 59% decline since 2016-17, whilst reports of rape increased by a third over the same period. The study also showed that referrals from the police to the Crown Prosecution Service have fallen 40% since 2016-17, again at the same time as reports to them from victims have increased. This can't be right. Anecdotally, I'm having many more calls with potential clients who tell me that the Crown Prosecution Service have decided not to prosecute in scenarios where just 4 or 5 years ago, my experience as a lawyer is that a prosecution would be taking place. Clearly, we are in real danger of reversing the decades of hard work that statutory services have done in this area very quickly if we are not careful, and something needs to change to ensure that this does not happen. We owe it to victims and survivors of abuse to turn the tide and ensure their cases are properly investigated and, where possible, prosecuted. Society needs to have faith in the criminal justice system and that it's protecting some of our most vulnerable victims of abuse. This is a key task for all of us to focus on over the coming months and years ahead. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, what an inspiring session this has been. I'm sure we will have received a number of questions. So over now to Anne, the CEO of Embrace.
Hello everyone, this is Anne from Embrace speaking. We're just about to go into the live Q&A session with our panel. First, a huge thanks to you for logging in and registering to follow our webinars. And for this morning's presenters, a massive thank you too to Chief Constable Joe Shiner from Sussex Constabulary, the National Lead for Policing for Children and Young People. Also to Rhys Dickinson, our very brave and inspirational ambassador. Gosh, what he's been through is almost unbelievable. And finally, from our series sponsor, Slater & Gordon, we heard from Kim Harrison, who is the Head of Abuse Operations at Slater & Gordon. So a big thanks to them. And also a big thank you, it would be very remiss of me not to thank our sponsor for today, CanCom. And CanCom is the company who Rhys is working for. So big thanks to them. Just to let you know who we've got on the panel today, we have Rhys in person. We also have Kim Harrison from our sponsor, Slater & Gordon, who you heard last. And we also have, for Joe Shiner's office, we have Caroline Adams. So a big welcome to you three to help answer these questions. I've got to say that my screen is positively lighting up with comments and thank yous to Rhys. And before we go any further, I'd just like to share some of these comments. They really are heartfelt, and you can tell that his input has been hugely appreciated. So from Sharon from Salesforce, thanks Rhys, thank you for being brave and telling your story. It helps us to understand the impact and why the support is so important. I wish you all the best for the future. Thank you so much for sharing your life experience, Rhys. There's a number of questions coming in for Rhys, but before we move to him, the first question is probably best answered by Caroline. This is Caroline Adams from Sussex. who is the staff officer to Joe Shiner. We have a question specifically on the police children and young people portfolio, Caroline. And this is from Sandra Beaton, who asks, has there been an evaluation of the previous 5-year children and young people strategy? And I think you perhaps could answer that for us. Caroline Adams.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. There hasn't actually been a formal evaluation, but we have been working with forces for the last 5 years. And what I can say is that there's been a lot of progress, and most forces have moved forward with a child-centred policing approach. And so much so that we're actually working at the moment with the Children's Commissioner for England and her office to refresh the strategy, to develop a new one, moving forward with a children's rights approach, so that we take that and enhance that element of the strategy and move it forward. So in answer to your original question, no, there's been no formal evaluation, but lots of anecdotal support for the strategy and the direction of travel that we are taking policing.
Thank you, Caroline. That sounds very positive, and I take on board the action towards children's rights. We definitely will be interested in following that and helping where we can. Thank you. We have a question now from Karen Livesey, who is asking Kim Harrison from Slater and Gordon, what further action is being taken regarding the definition of crime of violence? So that's one for you, Kim.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Unfortunately, not very much. A group of us from the Association of Personal Injury Lawyers who represent clients in criminal injuries compensation claims went down to the Ministry of Justice, it was about 18 months ago, to have a meeting with somebody there who'd asked to meet with us because they were looking at revising the scheme and they wanted some input. And we put various sort of suggestions to them about how the scheme should be improved, including the crime of violence issue, which does create a very practical problem sometimes for victims of abuse. The Ministry of Justice then went very quiet. I think Brexit and various other things got in the way, but has now finally published their consultation documents to revise the criminal injuries compensation scheme. That was published about a month ago, I think the end of July, beginning of August time, and the consultation ends at the beginning of October, and I'm helping some other lawyers put together a response from the Association of Personal Injury Lawyers on the criminal injuries compensation scheme consultation, but they've not mentioned at all revising the definition of the crime of violence. Indeed, they want to keep that as a central plank in the scheme, which for other areas of crime, I can understand it makes sense. The scheme isn't just about sexual violence; it's about other crimes. It just doesn't make very much sense for crimes of sexual abuse and assault. Always, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So that's still a problem that we need to campaign on as lawyers and try and persuade the Ministry of Justice that the scheme simply isn't fit for purpose at the moment.
Lovely, thank you for that, Kim. Again, lots of questions coming in, but many of them are really singing Rhys's praises. The next question, Rhys, is directed to you. This is from Dan Cumpsty from Leicestershire Police. And he's saying that working previously in Leicestershire Police child abuse team, both child and adult, I still remain moved by the internal strength that Rhys has shown. And this is the question for you, Rhys. How did you cope with your mother's non-intervention with this, and how is your relationship with your mother now?
Thank you. I just want to say, firstly, just say thank you to everyone for the really supportive comments. It really means a lot to have them nice comments, and hopefully what I've said has kind of had an impact and gives you a better kind of understanding. In relation to that question, it's quite a hard one. At time, I just think how does my mum not know? But my mum worked long hours. She worked 12-hour shifts. She worked in care for the elderly. She was never, so my abuser always took the opportunity. He was our kind of main kind of carer because my mum wasn't there. She was out. So he had so many opportunities. And as soon as I kind of got the courage to tell my mum, I saw a question earlier about when did I first tell my mum and kind of what was that trigger. Well, it was when just after I started secondary school, so I was about just over nearly 11, or I was just over 11 when I first decided that that's enough is enough, and I kind of built up the kind of courage, and I think my mum kind of knew something wasn't right with me, and just told her what had happened, and straight away she was like, we need to like go. She like confronted my abuser straight away. And she got us out of the house and went to stay with my grandparents, and she got us out the house, and the next day we were down at the police station giving our evidence. And yeah, I think I probably has had a slight impact on the relationship with my mum and the rest of my family, because it's such an ordeal that you go through, but I think through what we've been through, in some ways our relationship is stronger and better than ever. And she was just so upset that we'd been through this and she didn't know and she couldn't do anything about it. And so when she did have the opportunity to do something about it, she made sure she did that straight away. And kind of, yeah, I think that's probably my answer to that question. Yeah, that she wished she could have done more and she wished she'd known. And I think at the time I did blame her a little bit. How did she not know? But she was always out, and he was so kind of clever. And he was violent towards her as well. He was a very aggressive person. So it's a hard situation to be in, but my relationship now is stronger and better than ever.
That's brilliant to hear, Rhys. There is another question that's come in for you from Kirsty Meller from Portsmouth, and she's asking, do you think the government is doing enough to support survivors of crime? I think I may know your answer to that, but how would you respond? Is the government doing enough to support the statutory services?
No, I definitely say no. The services that I got when I went through kind of what I went through, I had great support from organisations such as Embrace, the NSPCC. Victims of crime helped me through the trial, but I had to travel a long way to receive my counselling. I lived in Essex. I had to commute over an hour and a half into London. There was nowhere in the area that could provide the support that I needed. No, they said that there was no one that I could go speak to, especially for a young man. They said that they could speak to female victims of abuse, but they didn't know how to deal with a male victim of abuse, and that kind of stood out to me. And so I had to, when I decided that I wanted to get help, I had to travel so far, and where I received my counselling service is actually now shut down. It doesn't exist because of lack of funding, and it's so hard to like find these services. It's so important. Kind of the counselling and the talking therapy was one of the biggest things for me. It kind of showed me how to talk about, kind of understand what I went through. When you're such a young age and you being 6 years old, it kind of confuses your mind. And there's still demons that I struggle with today. There's still stuff, but through my counsel, I've learned how to deal with what I've been through, kind of control my emotions and anxiety and my stresses, and that kind of changed my life. So I think the government definitely needs to do more to support services and being able to offer that kind of counselling, talking therapy, and supporting the whole family. I think that is really key.
Definitely, and I think certainly from Embrace's perspective, your story, your experiences are helping us to develop those important services. And certainly we have found that where we can give support to the parents or the adult carers in the family, then that greatly helps the young people receiving talking therapy, whether that's emotional support or counselling. So thank you for that, Rhys. You do really, your story is so shocking, and yet it is so inspiring, because we know through you that you can survive this, and actually go on to have a very successful life. Just switching topics now, we've had a question from Karen Livesey, who would like to know more about the reboot scheme that Chief Constable Shiner mentioned in her presentation. So coming to back to Caroline Adams. Caroline, can you summarise what reboot is and what made it successful?
Yes, certainly. It's a scheme whereby we intervene early and identify young people that would benefit from an intervention at the first point that they kind of come to notice around some kind of criminal type behaviour. And that it's the value of the scheme is that it's a multi-agency approach, so that our partners across Sussex actually deliver an intervention for that young person, and each intervention is a bespokely created intervention in effect. And because we're intervening at an early stage and providing support for that young person, some of that support involves a coach, a mentor for that young person to help them get them back from the line of behaviour that they're starting to go down. And so that's, I think, why it's been so successful, is that it's multi-agency, it's at the earliest point of intervention, and it really is making a difference to those young people.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I think we will hear more about the scheme and how other partners can get involved on another session. I think that I'm being told that we're coming to the end of our time. So again, a very big thank you to our presenters and also our panel of speakers. So that's Joe Shiner, Rhys Dickinson, Kim Harrison, and of course we were joined by Caroline Adams. So thank you very much, and a huge thanks again to CanCom and to you, the listeners and the viewers. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time for webinar 3. Thank you so much.